Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for investing your time with us today. The International Association of Female Artists, IAFA, is the world's leading organization for women artists. Art has a social role to serve, and the artist has a moral obligation to society. It can engage the social issues and the environmental of its day, either directly or indirectly. Not every artwork needs to address the poverty, famine, war, corruption, and injustice, but an artist should not ignore the pain and the suffering of his fellow human beings. Because of that, IAFA is hosting a series of panel discussions, collectively titled Artists Without Borders. Today's panel discussion theme is social justice and racism, and will be hosted by artist Ellen Schlase, Vice President of the International Association of Female Artists.
In today's New York Times, David Brooks says that America is facing 5 epic crises at once. In his words, we are in the midst of losing a fight with COVID-19. And second, we are grappling with growing understanding of what the African American faces every day of his or her life. In addition to political realignment, social justice is inserting itself into a quasi-religion. And finally, we're on the verge of economic depression, a financial meltdown as many businesses are on the brink, and the continuing health emergency will mean that economic activity will not fully resume. We are here today as artists, not as experts, not to judge, but to create a space to offer our unique lens and insight. In doing so, we hope that we can illuminate each other to better understand the many places and experiences that we come from in a world that is both larger and smaller at the same time. I want to welcome Mung Tang, Yoko Idu, Lynette Black, and Jill Stebbins to this panel. My name is Ellen Schlase, and I will be your host today. Our purpose today is to hone in on social justice, which is part and parcel of the International Association's primary focus. As artists, we bring our passion and purposes to our medium, and it is the fuel with which we express ourselves. Let's begin with a brief discussion about our own personal experience with social justice, whatever that may be, and then we will delve into a few other questions that may arise.
I'm an artist, and I've always cared about social injustice, and I belong to a very progressive church. And we have been dealing with racial injustice for the last 7 years since I've been a part of that church.
I have been here, I'm from China. I have been here for 30 years. After I retired from software engineering job, I started to make documentaries with a Chinese language television. I also write in Chinese for the people like me, the first generation immigrants from China.
I also was born on the east side of St. Paul, Swedish immigrants, so I've always had a very close tie to an immigrant view. I was born here, but the east side it's got a solid Italian community, German, Swedish, Irish, and all of have their own churches. So, and Polish. So that's just, that was sort of the foundation. And I purposely joined Plymouth Congregational Church because of its social justice and arts orientation. And it turns out that it was in the epicenter of the violence and not very far from where George Floyd was murdered. The social justice artwork that I did was regards refugees and how unfair they were being demonized for all the world's problems and being stopped at the boundaries. Now, because of where I live, since Philando Castile was murdered, since Trump was elected, and the differences between the Obama administration and Michelle Obama to Trump and Melania, I have wanted to do an art project regards that, both their backgrounds and what they say in speeches And also now with Philander Castile being murdered right by my home. And I'm in this diverse community with the University of Minnesota, and then my church is right where the other murder took place. I have been trying to list ideas to do a big project which would involve research and probably collaboration with other artists, where we address some of these issues, because they all do intertwine. So that's my next goal, is to do a big art project with multiple women addressing some of these issues with multiple media.
A couple of reasons I had a surgery in Boston. And the next day, nurse come in, you know, the first question she asked me, where are you from? I said, New York. My natural response is I've been here for 30 years. I know I'm in Boston, but my address, my permanent address is in I said, New York. She said, no. Where you really she from? Paused. She said, no, where are you originally from? Oh, I say China. I think it's so easy. You can see my last name. But then I said, what does that has to do with your job?
Yeah.
So, you know, especially when somebody's in the hospital after surgery, you treat me differently. You want to treat me different because I'm from China originally. You know, that made me concerned. And I saw, okay, maybe this is how some people get treated. Even, you know, African American has been here for so many generations.
Right.
So that raised my awareness of racism.
And I chose the Black Lives Matter thing because it was right when a lot of Blacks were being killed. Michael Brown, many of these people, Michael Brown was left in the street, literally, after being shot by a policeman. And I thought that was so bad. Anyway, that was my social justice piece at that time. And so the whole Black Lives Matter and being, you know, Black or being white in America was always a big concern for me.
I was listening to the radio the other day, and they said that many of the slave owners received $130 per person for the work that was done on the White House. And the slaves built the White House, but the owners received $130 per
slave. Yeah.
Per slave for producing that work. And so as we begin to really experience, what does that really mean? The first time in my life that the Confederacy is only 5 years in existence.
Oh.
And yet it has such an impact over our culture and how it's, since the Civil War, has been like a whole culture in the South of control and idealism for that period, which was 5 years of. And so to think about that would have that much impact on a culture and how our laws are shaped.
Okay. Jump into the social justice. It's Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie, and she did a TED talk where she spoke about the danger of a single story. And this is really what happens when you have a single story being told and you've been schooled in that for a long time. Exactly. So, I mean, in the context of Nigeria, for instance, where for many years they told us our story from the colonizer's point of view. And now people are trying to deliberately learn our story without all of that, because we had a story, okay? Before the British showed up, we had our own story. But obviously that story was changed and, you know, sometimes made our own culture seem as if it was inferior to their culture. So that's what that just reminded me of. Now, so going back to your original question about the social justice, I think what is closer to me is more to do with class. So we have a lot of women issues going on right now, which I had spoken about in our last conversation. A lot of people are coming up talking about rape, but the one I think I have worked with more closely has to do with class, and more so in education. Being privileged to have quality education my whole life, But when I moved back to Nigeria, the reality is that most people don't have access to that same kind of education. And to be honest, I think you're only as strong as your youth is. And if you're not educating your youth in the right way, you cannot have a strong society. I remember when I first read Mouse or Persepolis. I don't know if you know both books. Mouse is about a Hungarian Jewish man's story during the Holocaust, Maus, and then Persepolis is about Iran when Ayatollah came in 79. You know, both stories were written as comics. And it was so interesting. Like I was able to read both stories probably within a couple of days because it was such a fast read, such a quick read, you know. And I told him about that. And I just explained to him that you have a skill set that, trust me, people are looking for. Because like I said, you're only as strong as your youth are. If we educate our youth and we equip them with the right skills, our society will be a much better place.
Several different issues. And I think Mung talked about it last time we were on our call about classism or economic disparity, which is kind of a notion of classism. And that does bring up a lot of issues for a number of us who might have experienced economic disparity or grown up in a different class. I think you spoke to it a little, Kathy, when you talked about the fact that you were able to go to college and you had support for your process, and many young students who are in college are kind of grappling with survival issues, or even in high school. And so I think we've brought up a lot of different issues, including Lynette, who talked about the idea of being from a family that had an immigrant status in this culture and came over from Sweden and Norway. I think it was Norway, Sweden and Norway. Sweden, because of economic issues, and came to this country and were looked down upon in a number of ways as immigrants. So all of these things kind of influence our own lens on how we step up to the plate to understand social justice, if not for ourselves, for other people.
And I mean, this is coming from what Lynette said. So your family came from between the 1880s to 1910s. Do you think that American culture, white American culture, is more homogeneous, even though you came from such a diverse background? Because Ellen said she came from an Italian family. Lynette, she said Swedish. I don't know where Jill might have come from, but it's also very easy sometimes to look at white Americans as homogeneous, but you also have your own different, you know, backgrounds and your own different stories and your own different, you know, how things work, you know, because there's certain cultures that will still carry down from how your family do certain things, you know, that you just, but it can be very easy to miss that sometimes in America because you just sometimes feel like it's a homogeneous, you know, like they would say the melting pot, you know, everyone has been melted in and you've now formed a whole new culture. Because I'm just thinking to myself now that Ellen's experience from Lynette's experience must be very different as well. I mean, there must be similarities. One of you grew up in the East Coast, one of you grew up in Midwest, you know, one of these families Italian, the other one's is Swedish, but still, it must be quite different.
I think that's true, and I think America is so vast, and we have such different geographies. I mean, Florida with the swamp, and the Native Americans in Florida were very different than the Native Americans on the prairie. Then you have the Native Americans on the East Coast, they were fishermen, and then you have the hunters. Even Native American cultures are vastly different. Some were very warrior type, some were very peaceful and agrarian, some were wanderers. They kept moving. And then each state is like, California is a country in itself. And the more I hear about California culture and country, I didn't know that Russia wanted to have that as their own. Russia. I mean, there's so much to unpack in America, and I think you're so right. We look at each other, we make assumptions, and locally here we have a lot of Somali, and they're very new, you know, since the 1990s, relatively new, and so there's lots of people will meet them and assume something, you know, about them, and their past is very different from, say, I have a friend from Chad who has been in the United States many years, an artist from Chad, and no one should assume that all Black people are the same, you know, or have the same life view. And unless you travel, you don't get to experience that, and you don't, and only the wealthy, like myself, basically, even though I came from working class people, originally starting from with nothing, but I was educated and I'm wealthy, basically, if you compare me. And we traveled a lot our whole life. My parents traveled, and we were tent campers all over the United States. They took us to the World's Fair in Montreal. They somehow, I don't know why, but they wanted to learn about the world. And Montreal only spoke French, you know, and the World's Fair, they had booths from every country around the world trying to show off their culture and their achievements. And it was a real eye-opener for me, and I was in middle school. But there are other friends I have in Minnesota, the only thing they ever did is hunt and fish, and went maybe camping, or they went up to a cabin, or they just stayed home, you know, and they don't have that. So I'm blessed and I'm lucky, and I've wanted to seek that out in my own career and in my own life and in my art. And it's always surprises me so much to hear the challenges and the differences, you know, it wakes me up like.
I tend to believe that our culture, because it was colonized by the English, still has a very a strong tie to white supremacy, because most of the leaders of our country have been not necessarily immigrant, but having a long history of family roots in English, or what you would call white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. And so that, I think Mung and I were having a conversation about, we haven't had very many or any Jewish presidents. We haven't had any Italian presidents, I don't think. We haven't had any, we might have had presidents that have Swedish ancestry now, but I think the closer you are to being white, it definitely is noted. We haven't had any Chinese presidents. And this is a country full of Asian people and African people, and that's why I think that Obama was such a miraculous presidency, because when he got elected, I remember sobbing for days, because I had felt like this transformation was happening, and that we were recognizing that we were not totally a white culture, that we were from many different dimensions. And so to me, that was just him getting elected was like, he didn't need to do anything else. As far as I was concerned, he did it. It was miraculous.
But now we're seeing the backlash to that. So.
And now we're seeing the backlash to that.
Yes.
Exactly. Joko, have we talking about something that makes sense to you?
Yes, you did. You both addressed it. You did.
Yes, and my husband and I had a young man from Uganda stay with us for 2 years, and we kind of ended up sponsoring him, and he's like, he considers us his parents. His parents are dead, but he was just here, and it was such a delightful experience. And he was a young man when he came here. It was like 5 years ago. So, but he was with us for 2 years, 2.5 years, and we love him. And so we learned a lot about ourselves and about him and about another culture. Even though I have never really personally, because of my economic background, been able to just be a world traveler and to leave the country as I would love to do. So that's another long story, but we won't spend any time on that. So
I will just say that one of my daughters married an Asian American whose parents were from China. He himself was born in Washington, D.C., but they just had a baby, a little boy. So he's half Caucasian and half
Asian.
Asian.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see, our current president is talking about the Chinese virus and so on, which really has an impact on people's
so
behavior.
many levels.
Yes.
There's been violence against Asians for that reason. Horrible.
Since
horrible.
This is a nice neighborhood. One day I took a walk in my neighborhood, and a young couple walking with a stroller of their baby, 2 years old. And as soon as this man saw me, he made a gun shape with his hand and pointed at me. It's horrible. And these are my neighbors. Can you believe it?
No.
Yeah, and also my friend who shops at grocery store nearby, she told me she was harassed in the grocery store, and another man told me he was harassed twice.
That I would very much like to hear how people set an example by their words and actions to be welcoming to people who are different from them, whether that be somebody from Texas or wherever. I just think it would be helpful to hear the flip side of the problems as to what we can do, each of us in our own lives. We only have a small sphere, but that's what we have, and then we can be impactful in a rippling way.
I think one of the ways is to actually learn about the person. I think when you know more about a person, it can be more difficult to hate them, because ignorance allows you to hatred to me thrives on ignorance, so when you don't know about the person, you don't know about the other. And I've lived in the States, I've lived in Europe. My experience in Europe was different. I felt like Europeans tended to know more about the world, but Americans, I always felt were a bit more like, in their own bubble. If you ask me personally, I think a part of it has to do with the fact that your country is a lot more isolated. You're only bordered by 2 other countries: Canada, which some people argue is very similar to the States. I don't think so. And Mexico. And also, when you're in a position of power, like the US is, you're the world power, let's face it. It can be very difficult sometimes to say, let me learn about the lesser powers, because you're like, why should I waste my time? Okay, there's no point. But you have to actually be very deliberate, because I lived in Germany, I lived in England. Very different experience. I'm not saying they don't have their own racism and all these other social justice issues. Of course they do. But I also just felt like they always knew a little bit more. It was when I was in America that a lot of people would say to me, oh, how come you speak English so well? But I didn't really get that in Germany or in England, because they knew that Nigerians spoke English. And I'm not saying you will know everything about the world. It's not possible. We're all learning. When Lynette spoke about Native Americans and how, Native Americans here are different from Native Americans there, I learned something new. But I just think we just have to all really be deliberate about learning from one another. Yeah. And with Americans, I think that's just particularly tougher because, like I said, in a position of power.
Yeah.
So that's really shocked me. I feel like the numbers of the the anti-science people in this country are much, much more than what I thought.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I think Joko made a very good point. To answer Lynette's question, I think appreciation of other people's culture and first knowing the culture of other people is a good way to start. It's a good point to start, to respect each other, to appreciate. Like I hope like PBS or somewhere, last night I was browsing at PBS documentaries. There are a lot of wonderful documentaries about United States. You know, as a foreign person, it's good for me to know, but probably as Americans who are brought up in, you know, born here, probably it's good for PBS to have some documentary about other different cultures. So to create awareness of difference in different group.
Yeah. When my parents had the young lady, the Black person from the city come to our small town, that was a chance for us to learn about each other.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
ask questions, you know, what is your life like?
Yes.
The interesting thing, I think, that I have a way of always looking at all sides, which I always have done. I think that people who actually discriminate aren't even aware that they are doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's partially because people are overwhelmed, that they are wrapped up in their own small world, and they aren't able to really take the time. I've done real estate as my supporting income for many years, in addition to art. And in the real estate world, I would always take on clients that were from other cultures. I remember working with a Chinese family. This was like probably 20 years ago, and watching, really being amazed at how they navigated, not knowing the language. Their kids spoke for them, how they handled money and everything.
Yes.
But I remember also that at one point my boss said to me, "Why do you waste your time? You are such a good agent, and you could be doing, you know, more sales if you didn't waste your time with people that you had to explain things to and listen to and try to navigate and understand the process and make sure that it was done ethically and legally." But I wanted to do that, but it was almost like I was being chastised because they wanted my numbers up, but it just wasn't who I was. And so sometimes they would say, "You could make so much money doing what you do. You're so good at what you do." And it was like I would take and have to spend time. I had some Ethiopian clients, and I've worked with clients that don't speak English, and I still have made sure they got the right interpreters, etc. And it's just a lot more effort. And I think that some people don't take that time, don't, you know, spend the time to actually listen to people and understand their particular place.
Oh, and in the field of medicine, it's the same way. It's production. And you could see more patients, you know, if you do this or that and don't take so much time.
Right. Yes. And so many people need that understanding, especially if they're just here. And I thought about my grandparents coming in the 1900s and the 1800s. They needed people to understand them. And we now are in a culture where we always have new people that need understanding and to be listened to, and for us to suspend certainty about what we think about them.
You have very kind heart, Ellen. You know, to go back to Lynette's question, I think age is very important. As artist, if you can have some artist image or whatever, or I don't know, music or something for younger kids, for multiculturalism, that will work better, because people get this kind of concept of race from very young age. If people from young age learn to respect each other, so it will make this job much easier. We don't want to wait until people go to college and change their mind. That's a long process. It's much. I heard now even in kindergartens, kids are talked about slavery, these kind of things.
Wow.
So I think if people can start earlier, kids can get education about race equality from younger age, from early, so that will help.
That's very true.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
That was one
Thank
of the
you.
event.
This
That
is
was one-
really wonderful and a great question, Lynette. I don't know that we can answer that all in one.
Another day, another topic.
Yeah, no, it's huge. It's really huge. A huge
I think one
topic.
thing about I wanted to make a mention about my neighborhood is middle class, so it's pretty well off. It's near the University of Minnesota, so the immigrants that we have here are usually professors or are here for a master's or PhD or that type of thing. They come, they stay. Sometimes they stay here permanently and become citizens. Sometimes they go back. But I think that made my children, it gave them some opportunities. For example, there's like over 32 countries that were represented in the grade school. And my first son had a best friend from the Philippines, and he was absolutely heartbroken when he went home.
Oh.
And we had a couple lost boys, which is, I'm not exactly sure what country they came from, but they escaped from Africa during a civil war, and they spoke at my son's high school graduation. And my son had a girl from Sweden and a boy from Greece, and my younger son's best friend was from a country in North Africa. I don't remember which one, but his parents were immigrants. So it was just sort of part of life. Although the class issue is, it was educated.
Yeah,
An educated
Lynette.
class and wealthy. So
yeah, it's a wonderful way to end, and I apologize for cutting us short, but we're already 4 minutes past, and I appreciate everybody's time. I look forward to another group, and hope that we can have a few of you back to be on the panel again, and maybe get a couple of new people on to join us. And we are thinking that we could probably add maybe 9 at the most people on the panel, because we don't want to have it so much that people don't get a chance to talk. But I want to thank you for all being with us today, and I appreciate your time and commitment to Artists Without Borders. Thank you.
Thank you.